April 1942. Smoke still drifted over the wreckage of Pearl Harbor. Just months earlier, on December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack had left the United States Navy crippled and the nation stunned. Battleships lay broken in the shallow harbor, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, more than 2,400 Americans killed in a single morning. The Pacific seemed lost. The Philippines were under siege. Malaya and Singapore had fallen. Japan's flag flew over territories stretching thousands of miles. And every day, Tokyo's leaders boasted that their empire was unstoppable. But in Washington and across America, one question echoed: how do we strike back? At the time, no American bomber had the range to fly from bases to Japan and return. The Japanese homeland sat deep across the Pacific, shielded by thousands of miles of ocean. A direct strike seemed impossible. And yet, a plan was forming. It would be desperate, dangerous, and almost unthinkable. 16 planes, 80 men, no guarantee of return. The weapon, a brand new medium bomber, the B-25 Mitchell, and the man to lead it, a daredevil aviator named Jimmy Doolittle. The story of the B-25 begins before the war, in the late 1930s. America's Army Air Corps needed a new medium bomber, something faster, stronger, and more versatile than the aging designs left over from the early 1930s. North American Aviation answered the call. Their design would become the B-25 Mitchell, named after air power visionary General Billy Mitchell, who had predicted the dominance of aviation decades before. The Mitchell was sleek, rugged, and powerful, 52 feet long, with twin Wright R2600 engines. It could reach speeds of nearly 300 miles per hour. It carried up to 3,000 pounds of bombs and bristled with defensive .50 caliber machine guns. But what made the B-25 special was its adaptability. It could bomb from medium altitude, strafe at low level, skip bombs across water into ships, and even mount a 75mm cannon in its nose. More than 9,800 would eventually roll off American assembly lines, serving in every theater of the war. Yet in 1942, it was still untested, and it was about to be thrown into the most daring mission ever attempted. After Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt wanted revenge. The American people demanded it. But how? No bomber in the U.S. arsenal could reach Japan from bases in the Pacific. Then came the impossible idea. What if medium bombers could take off from an aircraft carrier? It had never been done. Carriers launched fighters, torpedo planes, maybe light bombers. But a full twin-engine medium bomber? No one believed it could work. Yet Navy Captain Francis Lowe and Army Air Force planners thought otherwise, and soon the idea reached one man, Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle. By 1942, Jimmy Doolittle was already a legend. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a scientist, a record breaker, and a daredevil. He had flown across the continental United States in less than a day. He had set airspeed records, pioneered instrument flying, and even earned a doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT. But more than anything, he was relentless, calm under pressure, quick to adapt, and fearless in the face of danger. If anyone could lead such a mission, it was Jimmy Doolittle. He accepted the assignment immediately. The mission was bold, almost suicidal. Launch 16 B-25s from a carrier, bomb Japan, then fly on to China. There would be no returning to the carrier. The crews would either land in China or run out of fuel trying. Volunteers were called. 80 men drawn from across the U.S. Army Air Forces stepped forward. Many didn't even know what they were signing up for. They were told only, "It will be dangerous. Some of you may not come back." Training began at Eglin Field in Florida. The crews practiced taking off their B-25s in less than 500 feet of runway, the length of a carrier deck. They stripped weight wherever possible, removing defensive guns, adding fuel tanks, even cutting equipment to the bare minimum. The Mitchells were modified with extra fuel capacity, de-icing boots, and special bomb racks. They were not built for carriers, but they would have to become carrier bombers overnight. The men grew suspicious. They asked, "Where are we going?" Doolittle simply told them, "Somewhere far away." On April 1st, 1942, the aircraft and crews were loaded onto the USS Hornet. As the ship sailed west across the Pacific, the men finally learned their target, Japan. Silence swept across the deck. The mission was no longer abstract. They would be bombing Tokyo itself. On the morning of April 18th, the task force was spotted by a Japanese picket boat. Fearing they had been discovered, Doolittle made the call. Launch immediately. The B-25s were still 650 miles from Japan, farther than planned, but they had no choice. Imagine standing on the deck of the USS Hornet. The seas are rough. A stormy wind cuts across the deck. 16 B-25 bombers are lined up, their wings stretching over the edges of the carrier. Doolittle's plane goes first. Engines roar, wheels rolling forward, the bomber rushing toward the end of the deck. For a moment, it seems impossible. But at the last second, the B-25 lifts, climbing just above the waves. Cheers erupt. One by one, the other bombers follow. 16 Mitchells, airborne from a carrier for the first time in history. The raid is on. Hours later, Japanese air raid sirens wailed over Tokyo, Nagoya, Kobe, and Yokohama. Doolittle's men swept in low, dropping their bombs on factories, oil tanks, and military targets. Civilians rushed for cover. The material damage was limited, but the psychological shock was immense. For the first time, Japan's mainland had been struck. Tokyo was not untouchable. The empire's leaders were humiliated. For America, the effect was electrifying. Headlines shouted the news. Morale, shattered by Pearl Harbor, soared. The mission was not over. None of the B-25s had enough fuel to return to the carrier. One landed in the Soviet Union, where its crew was interned. The rest turned toward China. Night fell. Rain lashed the coast. Most aircraft ran out of fuel. Crews bailed out in the dark. Some crashed, landing in fields or mountains. Several men were captured by Japanese forces in China. 3 were executed. 1 died in captivity. Others were rescued by Chinese villagers, who paid a terrible price when Japan retaliated against them. Doolittle himself crash-landed in a rice field. Crawling from the wreckage, he thought the mission a failure. 16 planes lost, men killed or captured. He expected to face court-martial on his return, but instead, he was celebrated. Back in the United States, Doolittle and his men were hailed as heroes. He was promoted 2 grades on the spot to brigadier general. He received the Medal of Honor. The raid became a turning point in the war of morale. The message was clear. Japan was not invincible. America could and would strike back. The Doolittle Raid was only the beginning. In the Pacific, the B-25 became a scourge of Japanese shipping. Pilots developed deadly skip bombing techniques, flying at low altitude, releasing bombs that skipped across the water like stones before smashing into ships. Some B-25s were modified with massive 75mm cannons in their noses, flying artillery pieces that could blast transports and bunkers. Others carried heavy machine gun arrays, turning them into airborne gunships for strafing runs. In Europe, the Mitchell flew precision raids on bridges, rail yards, and supply depots. Flying low, they dropped their bombs with remarkable accuracy, and their loss rate was far lower than the big B-17 and B-24s. By war's end, the B-25 had flown in every theater: Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, China, Burma, India. More than 9,800 were built. It became one of the most versatile and reliable bombers of the war, a machine that adapted to every role asked of it. The B-25 Mitchell was more than just a bomber. It was a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and courage. For the United States, it was the first weapon of revenge after Pearl Harbor. For Japan, it was the proof that their skies were not safe. And for history, it became forever tied to one name, Jimmy Doolittle. The Mitchell, the Raid, Doolittle, forever remembered.